all you really need to do is have one role model of someone who is wealthy and who breaks that stereotype. And I think that can really help.
Hey, it's Walter here, and you're at the Think Profit podcast, where we're going to help you develop a rock-solid trading confidence and avoid the potentially endless cycle of system switching. Right, Hugh?
That's right. We're going to help you develop a wealth mindset, develop a trading strategy that fits your core personality, and help you overcome the obstacles that stop over 90% of traders.
All right, Hugh, sounds good. You ready to go?
Yeah, let's do this.
Hey, Walter, why do we think rich people are bad, and how does that affect our trading?
Well, for me, I don't know about you, but for me, a lot of times, and a lot of traders I know, their ideas, their stereotypes, it comes at a young age, So like I remember when I was a kid, I went to a birthday party of a friend of mine, and she was in my class, and her dad owned all the McDonald's, like all the McDonald's restaurants in the area, which is kind of a rural. I grew up in a rural area, so it's spread out, over maybe like say 50 miles. This guy had all the McDonald's restaurants. And so it was really funny. Like when I came back from the party, my mom and dad would be like, "Oh, what was it like there?" And you know what I mean? Like it was kind of like I went to like the North Pole or something. Everyone's asking about with Santa Claus, Like, so you pick up these things, I think, over time from growing up about like these stereotypes about, I wonder how many people he had to screw over to get that money. You know what I mean? And like these sorts of things. And so there's two things to untangle here. One is that your relationship with money and your attachment to money. And two would be what you think about people who have a lot of money. And that usually comes pretty early. And you can even see it in movies. Like there are these movies about the rich old miser, or like, like a Christmas Carol. They have and there's another one where like, there was a movie had Richard Pryor in it, and this kid, and the kid was really wealthy, and then Richard Pryor somehow like got connected into the family, and he was like hired to be the kid's friend or something. And there's all these movies where they have this stereotype of the rich person and how they're kind of not doing exactly everything right, whereas the people that don't have the money are doing everything the right way and sort of thing. So I think you have to untangle that and see. One thing that can help is just having someone that you look up to when you're growing up that has a lot of wealth. So for example, my grandfather was a good example of this for me, because he adopted my mother and her siblings. And so, he came from he had built up a lot. He was a farmer growing up, and he married my grandma on the farm next door. But what was interesting was, he kind of built up his wealth over time and started making more money than the president of the company that he worked for and all this stuff. And so there's a lot of issues with that. And then he had these vacation homes and different islands and stuff that I got to visit as a young grandchild. And so I saw a really good example of someone who had done pretty well, in his life. Like there was nothing bad about him. You know what I mean? Everything we knew about him was great. And so it was kind of nice to have that role model, someone. But I think allowing your kids to have a role model, someone that they can look up to, that knows the game of money, because it is a game, and you can see that for who they are and not, pigeonhole them as someone that's negative. So I think a lot of it has to do with the stereotypes that you grow up with. So, and being able to find a mold or find a role model, someone that you can relate to and learn from that has already kind of done that in a good way can be really helpful. And that's always something that I want, my kids, and I feel like, even young adults growing up, there's a lot of indoctrination in stories and in the school system about what it means to be wealthy. And I think all you really need to do is have one role model of someone who is wealthy and who breaks that stereotype. And I think that can really help. Otherwise, it's a lot of deprogramming. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think a role model is definitely the best thing, right? Because when you see it in action, then you can say, hey, this guy's not that way. So not everybody's like that. But I think I was doing some thinking on this recently, and I kind of realized that, okay, that's something that we have to distance ourselves from as traders, because if you want to be wealthy, you have to think of wealthy people as being good. Some are good, some are bad. And but I think throughout history, I think really wealthy people, there have been more than a few really wealthy people who have abused their power, right? Like you're talking about kings in the medieval times, or certain politicians, in other times. And I think that that has carried forward into our like collective psyche. And I think that's kind of where that comes from. So you got to kind of realize, okay, that's not always the case, but there were a few bad examples, and that probably has led to where we are now, thinking that most rich people are bad, right? So I think once you can kind of see where that came from and distance yourself from it, I think it's really beneficial.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think like the younger generations coming up behind us aren't going to have as much of an issue with that, because it's almost like we're the fish in the fishbowl. We can't see the reality of what money is.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like money is a centralized thing. However, that's changing, and money is becoming a decentralized thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to completely, like, that is not in the future. It's already here, right? With cryptos. So in the future, what's going to happen? Well, actually, if you go back in the past, think about this. We didn't always used to have these centralized money stations, right?
It's
around
very
the world.
decentralized. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Like you think about back in the old days, there was like a bank out in California that would print notes, and you could use those notes out in California and Nevada.
Mm-hmm.
And there was another bank out in Illinois, Ohio. You know what I mean? Like it was like this regional thing.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about the United States here, but I'm sure it was similar in other places. With possible exceptions of the new countries that never had this. So what's cool about that? That's changing now, and what will happen is you're gonna see exactly the same thing that we saw with all these banks that printed their own notes. It's exactly what's happening right now with the cryptocurrencies. These are decentralized, and basically it's like a market of money. And so the market gets to decide which ones are useful, right? So if you took that note that was printed by the bank out in California and you took that to New York, it was up to the people in New York to decide whether or not that was worth anything, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's exactly what's happening now with cryptos, right? These cryptos, there's more than enough out there. And so people get to decide now which ones are actually worth anything. Which ones are you willing to, is the demand going to go up for, right? And so this has always been the case. It's only been recently with the centralized bank model that we've seen all the money go through one thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Through that. So yeah, so I think what the upshot of that, I think, is that the kids growing up now, or the kids that are yet to be born, like those generations, they're going to have a completely different concept of money than you and I do, because we've always been in this centralized economy where all the money goes through one spot, right? These guys print the money and they loan it to the countries, because that's how centralized banks work, right? They print the money and they loan it to the countries, and the countries take the money and they have to pay back the bank, right? That's how it works. So yeah, so I just think the whole thing is fascinating.
No, totally.
To see how this unfolds. Yeah,
I've seen several examples of like kids who are like 16 or whatever, and they've saved all their birthday and allowance money and they put it into something like Doge. Now they have like $1 million. So like now they are the rich person, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So,
yeah. So
right, cool.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Thanks, Walter.
See ya.
Yeah.
All information in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and is not trading or investment advice.